Don't come to my wedding. You're not my family anymore. My son sent me those words in a cold, heartless message that shattered me in one instant. 30 years of loving him, raising him, protecting him, even through his father's illness and passing, meant nothing now. All because his fiancée's family could offer him more. I read his message again, hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped my phone. Betrayal has a sound. It's the silence after your child throws you away. Before I go on, if you've ever felt pushed aside by your own family or have a story like mine, please subscribe to this channel, share your experience in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Your support means the world, because as you'll see, sometimes strangers care more than your own blood. The first tears didn't fall right away. Shock is a powerful anesthetic. I stood in my living room, staring out at the street beyond my window, watching people pass by under the old sycamore trees. I wondered if any of them could sense the explosion that had just gone off inside my chest. A single text, and my son cut me out of his life for the sake of the Walker family's money. I tried to steady my breathing, clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to call him, to beg him to reconsider, but I stopped myself. I'd already given too much. Just last night, Ethan had come by, still in his chef's whites from his new job, hair smelling faintly of rosemary and garlic from the dinner rush at the restaurant. He'd barely sat down before launching into his demand. "Mom, I need 35 grand for the wedding. This is the most important day of my life," he said, not even bothering to ask how I was, not even taking off his coat. He'd paced in front of me like a caged animal, phone in hand, already checking texts from Miranda. I set my cup of tea down, careful not to spill on the pile of unopened mail. "Ethan, honey, let's talk about this. $35,000 is more than half my savings, after your father's medical bills and the house repairs." My voice was gentle, pleading, but he didn't want to hear it. "That's pathetic, Mom. You always do this, act like you can't help. Miranda's parents already put down deposits. The dress, the venue, the flowers, everything is waiting on your part." He glared at me like I was ruining his life on purpose. I tried to explain, showed him my bank statements. "Ethan, this is all I have. I can give you $8,000. That's everything left from the insurance and what I've saved since Dad passed." But he just scoffed, pushing the papers aside like they were dirty napkins. $8,000? That's embarrassing. Miranda's dad would never let her down like this. Her brother got a new car as an engagement gift. She's ashamed to tell her friends what you're contributing. Each word felt like a slap, harder than the last. I gathered the scattered papers, feeling so small and tired. My husband's photo smiled up at me from the floor, eyes full of warmth and trust, eyes that had once looked at our son with nothing but hope. "I'm not Charles Walker," I said, but Ethan just rolled his eyes. "No, you're not. You've never understood what it takes to give someone a real future." His words echoed in the hollow spaces of our once happy home. My voice was thin, shaking. "What would your father say if he could hear you right now?" But Ethan just shrugged. He'd want me to be happy. He'd want me to have the wedding Miranda deserves. Before I could answer, he was already at the door. "I'll give you a week, Mom. Find the money, or just don't come at all." I watched him slam the door, watched his taillights fade into the dark, and wondered how everything could change so quickly. $8,000, once it would have seemed a fortune. Now, it wasn't enough to buy my way into my own child's life. I walked over and picked up my husband's photo, straightened it carefully on the mantel. The house felt so much emptier than before. Family pictures lined the shelves, Ethan at every age, birthday parties, graduations, Christmas mornings, proof that I'd done my best, even if my best had never been enough for him. But as I stood there, the shock slowly began to morph into something else, something colder, steadier. I realized I couldn't cry for a son who saw me as a wallet and nothing more. Not anymore. $35,000 was a price I wouldn't pay for his love, not if it cost me my dignity. Maybe it was time the Walkers learned who I really was. If you've ever felt like your own child traded you in for something shinier, stay with me. This story isn't over, and sometimes, the quietest people turn out to be the strongest. Subscribe, comment below, and let me know if you've ever been in my shoes. Because as you're about to see, there's more than one way to fight for your family. The next morning came much too quickly. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating the old pine table where Ethan used to do his homework, where we'd once laughed over burnt pancakes and science fair disasters. Now it felt more like a museum than a home. I made myself coffee, hands shaky, and tried to pretend that everything was normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. My phone buzzed with notifications. At first, I ignored them, thinking it was just some group text or a reminder for a dentist appointment. But then I saw Ethan's name. The message read, "Did you see Miranda's post?" Curiosity won out over pain. I opened Facebook and felt my stomach drop. Miranda Walker had tagged Ethan in a series of glossy photos, her at an upscale bridal salon on Beacon Avenue, holding up a Vera Wang gown, her mother Nancy fussing with the train, her father Charles standing off to the side, a credit card already in hand. Each picture was like a postcard from a life I couldn't afford. Miranda's caption, "Blessed to finally have real parents who would do anything to make our dreams come true. Can't wait for the big day, thanks to the Walker family's generosity." My breath caught in my throat. Real parents. That's what she wrote, for the whole world to see. I scrolled through the comments, over 100 already. "You're so lucky to have them. The Walkers are such a wonderful family. What an upgrade." Not a single mention of me. Not a word about the woman who'd raised Ethan, who'd stayed up all night sewing his Halloween costumes, who'd pawned her jewelry to pay for his college textbooks. I stared at my reflection in the window, the lines on my face suddenly sharper, my hair more gray than I remembered. I looked like someone who belonged in the background of other people's lives. I took a screenshot of Miranda's post, then the photos, then the thread of fawning comments. I made a folder on my desktop, naming it Ethan, Evidence. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to remind myself that it wasn't a bad dream. I tried to call Ethan, but he didn't answer. Instead, Miranda's voice came on the line. "Hi, this is Miranda. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I hung up. My son wasn't even answering his own phone now. He'd handed me off, like an unwanted RSVP. The day crawled by, heavy and airless. I found myself wandering the house, touching framed photos, old baby shoes, the worn handle of the rolling pin my husband gave me on our first anniversary. Grief is a thief. It steals your present by haunting you with the past. My only escape was the garden. I lost myself in the roses, cutting back thorny stems, trying to reclaim some order from the chaos. I heard a car engine and looked up to see a BMW, Miranda's father's, glide past, Ethan in the passenger seat. He didn't even look toward the house. He was laughing, head thrown back, carefree. I ducked behind the hydrangeas, not wanting him to see me like this, still covered in dirt, hands trembling. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, fighting the urge to text him again. Every mother knows that helplessness, the need to reach out, even when you know you shouldn't. I typed and deleted a dozen messages. "Ethan, please call me. We can work this out. I love you." But I sent none of them. The silence on his end was louder than any words. That night, I pulled out the old family albums. The earliest photos were faded now, Ethan as a newborn, wrapped in a blue hospital blanket, me smiling through exhaustion and joy. Our first Christmas after my husband died, just the two of us under a too-small tree, Ethan grinning with a paper crown on his head, surrounded by the love I thought would last forever. When had he become so distant? Was it when Miranda came into his life, dazzling him with promises and privilege? Or was it 100 smaller moments, a missed dinner, a forgotten birthday, a gentle refusal to buy him the latest phone? I wondered if every mother eventually becomes invisible to her children, replaced by something newer, richer, more exciting. As I turned the pages, I found a letter my husband had written Ethan for his high school graduation. I'd saved it all these years, pressed between photos. No matter what the world offers you, he'd written in his neat, looping hand, never forget the value of family, and never measure your worth by what's in your bank account. Love is what matters most. Take care of your mother. She's stronger than you know. I read the letter twice, tears blurring the ink. For the first time in days, I felt something besides pain, a spark of resolve. Maybe Ethan had forgotten where he came from, but I hadn't. I wasn't going to grovel for a place at his wedding, not when it meant selling off everything I'd worked for, just to keep up with the Walkers. I realized then that the only way forward was to protect what little dignity I had left. The Walkers might have money and influence, but they didn't have the history, the scars, the stories that made us a family. They could buy my son's wedding, but they couldn't buy my silence or my self-respect. I set aside the album and picked up my phone one last time. Ethan's message was still there, cold and final. But this time, instead of pleading, I typed 2 words, I understand. Then I hit send, placed my phone face down on the table, and let the house go quiet. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. It's strange how quickly the days blur when you're waiting for someone to come back to their senses. For 3 days, I hardly slept. I kept thinking Ethan would call, or at least text, something. But the only sound in the house was the tick of the clock and the wind rattling the old storm windows. By the 4th morning, I'd stopped expecting anything at all. That's when my phone started ringing. At first, I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? Silence, then a hurried voice, Miranda. Mrs. Foster, hi. I just wanted to check that everything's okay. Ethan's been a little worried. The florist says there's an issue with the payment for the peonies, and, well, the venue's asking for confirmation on your end. I could hear her tapping on her keyboard, probably messaging a dozen vendors at once, organizing a wedding that was eating up more money than my house was worth. I'm sure you understand, we want everything to be perfect. You'll send the money soon, right? Her voice was bright, brittle. She was used to getting her way, I could tell. I took a breath and answered as calmly as I could. Miranda, I've already told Ethan what I can contribute. I'm sorry if that's not enough for you and your family. I wish I could do more, but this is all I have. A pause, then a little sigh. Of course. I just wanted to check. We're all counting on you, you know. As soon as she hung up, I felt the old guilt and shame creeping back. But this time, I pushed it away. I poured myself a cup of tea and let myself enjoy the quiet. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't owe anyone an apology for what I didn't have. The day passed slowly. I cleaned out my closet, pulling down dresses I hadn't worn in a decade, party dresses from another life, the one where my husband and I had been invited everywhere, before cancer took him and money became a daily struggle. I found his old tie, the one he wore to Ethan's high school graduation, and pressed it gently to my face. Grief is sneaky, it comes back when you least expect it, disguised as nostalgia. That afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailbox, a real letter, not a bill or an ad. The return address said, Walker Events and Catering. Inside was a formal invitation to Ethan and Miranda's rehearsal dinner at the Blue Heron Club, the fanciest place in town, a place I'd only ever seen from the outside, with its white columns and polished brass doors. The invitation was thick, embossed, expensive. At the bottom, a handwritten note from Miranda's mother, we hope you'll be able to attend and join our family in celebration. P.S. The balance for the wine selection is still pending. I laughed, a small, bitter laugh. Even the invitations were a transaction. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a pad of paper and started making lists. It's what I do when I feel out of control: make lists, write down what I know. What I knew was this: Ethan wanted more than I could give, and the Walkers were using their wealth as both carrot and stick. But I also knew something else. People who need to buy love usually have something to hide. I thought of the stories I'd heard from friends at church, about business owners who flashed money but cut corners, who showed off donations but mistreated staff. The Walkers owned the Willow and Ivy, a chic restaurant on Parkside, always in the society pages. But rumors had swirled for years: under-the-table deals, cash that never got reported, staff who left quietly without references. I remembered how my husband used to say, "If something looks too good to be true, it usually is." I looked at the invitation again. The Walkers had gone out of their way to impress, but real family doesn't put a price tag on love. That's when I decided. I wouldn't just sit back and let them buy my son and erase me. I'd do what I did best: pay attention, gather facts, watch and wait. I wouldn't play their game, but I wouldn't let them win either. The next morning, I opened the old address book I kept in my desk. Most of the numbers were out of date, but one name jumped out at me: Harriet Kane. Harriet had retired from the city's financial crimes unit a few years back, but she'd always been sharp as a tack. We'd met at a book club, and I remembered how she'd once said, "People think money makes them untouchable, but there's always a trail." I found Harriet's number and dialed. She answered on the third ring, voice warm and familiar. "Maggie Foster." "My goodness, it's been ages. How are you?" We chatted for a few minutes, the easy kind of conversation you only have with people who've seen you at your worst. Then I told her, as simply as I could, about the Walkers, about their restaurant, their sudden bursts of generosity, the money that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Harriet was quiet for a long moment. "You know, Maggie, you might be onto something. A few red flags have come across my desk, even in retirement. If you want, I can look into their business records, see if anything pops up." I thanked her, relief and anxiety mingling in my chest. As I hung up, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't just a helpless bystander in this story anymore. For the first time since Ethan's message, I slept through the night. The fight for my son, and for myself, had truly begun. The days that followed passed in a strange, heightened state, half hope, half dread. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang one afternoon while I was pruning the azaleas. I almost didn't answer. But something told me I should. It was Ethan, his voice strained, almost unrecognizable. "Mom, you didn't send the payment for the venue. The Walkers are upset. Miranda's mother thinks you're dragging your feet on purpose. Can't you just do whatever you have to do?" I braced myself against the garden bench, letting the cool wood ground me. "Ethan, I told you what I can give. I'm not holding out on you. I wish things were different, but I can't risk everything I have left." There was a long silence, broken only by the faint murmur of voices in the background. Then Ethan's voice came back, brittle. "You could at least try. Miranda's dad says real family steps up. You're making us look bad, Mom." That word, real family, rang in my ears long after the call ended. As if decades of love, sacrifice, and sleepless nights could be erased by a checkbook. I stood in the yard, staring at the hydrangeas and remembering all the birthday parties, all the scraped knees I'd bandaged, all the times Ethan had run to me before anyone else. Where had that little boy gone? Back inside, I found myself drifting through the house, picking up old souvenirs, a seashell from a family trip to Cape May, Ethan's first pair of baby shoes, now scuffed and faded. I laid them out on the table, letting my memories anchor me as I fought the feeling that I was losing my son for good. That evening, Harriet called back. Maggie, I did some digging, she said, her voice crisp, professional now. You were right to be suspicious. The Walkers' restaurant files are a mess. Their declared income doesn't match the cars they drive or the memberships they have. There are deposits from companies that don't seem to exist, classic catering red flags. I felt a chill run through me, but also a strange sense of vindication. I wasn't crazy. What should I do, Harriet? Don't confront them, not yet. But keep your eyes open. If you see anything odd, document it. Take photos, write down details. If they're laundering money, it'll come out eventually. But you have to be careful. I promised I would, though the idea of playing detective in my own family's drama felt almost absurd. After we hung up, I took out a small notebook and started making entries, calls, amounts mentioned, names, anything that might later matter. It made me feel less helpless, like I was building a shield, one fact at a time. The next morning, a letter arrived from the Blue Heron Club, this time addressed to Mrs. Margaret Foster and guest. Inside was an RSVP card, a handwritten note from Miranda's mother, Nancy Walker, and an invoice for an outstanding balance of $7,500. We are counting on you to honor your commitment as mother of the groom. Thank you for your prompt attention. It was galling, how they turned everything into a bill. I almost laughed at the nerve of it. I placed the letter next to the invitation from before, a growing stack of demands masquerading as hospitality. Later that day, Miranda showed up at my door without warning. She was all smiles at first, dressed in a pastel dress, her hair done up as if for an afternoon tea. She brought a basket of macarons, lavender, rose, and pistachio. They looked beautiful, delicate, expensive. But her smile faded the moment she stepped inside and saw the look on my face. I hope you don't mind, Mrs. Foster, she said, placing the basket carefully on the table. I just wanted to talk, woman to woman. Planning a wedding is so stressful. I'm sure you remember. She perched on the edge of the sofa, legs crossed, eyes flicking around the living room at the photos of Ethan and me, at the faded curtains and thrifted furniture. Miranda, what is it you really want? I asked, keeping my voice even. She sighed, dropping the polite mask. My parents are worried. They feel like you're not supporting us. Ethan is embarrassed. He feels like you're letting him down, and honestly, so do I. I let her words hang in the air. I wanted to shout, to demand to know what she knew about love or loyalty. But I kept my voice low, my anger tightly coiled. I'm doing the best I can. I won't apologize for that. She pursed her lips, eyes narrowing. I know you want what's best for Ethan. So do I. But we can't have a successful marriage built on shame or resentment. My parents have worked hard for what they have, and they expect the same commitment from their in-laws. If you can't contribute more, maybe it's better if you step aside. It's what everyone is saying. My heart twisted, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I stood up, straightening my shoulders. Miranda, I'm not stepping aside. This is my son's wedding, and I'll be there, whether you like it or not. She blinked, surprised at my defiance. Then she smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. Of course, Mrs. Foster. We'll see you at the rehearsal dinner. She left the basket of macarons on the table and swept out of the house, heels clicking on the porch. I stared at the door long after she was gone, my resolve settling in like steel. I wouldn't let anyone, especially the Walkers, erase me from Ethan's life. Whatever secrets they were hiding, I'd find them. I was done playing the victim. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet. I waited for another call from Ethan, but instead, I heard only from his fiancée. Miranda sent a curt email with the subject line, urgent, vendor payment. Attached was yet another invoice, this time for the rehearsal dinner at the Blue Heron Club, totaling more than my monthly pension. The message was brief, almost businesslike. "Hi Margaret, please see attached. As discussed, we need this resolved by Friday. Thanks in advance." I stared at the screen, feeling a kind of numbness settle in. The Walkers were relentless. Every communication was about money, as if the wedding itself was a series of transactions, not a celebration of love. I wondered if Ethan even realized how thoroughly they'd wrapped him up in their world, a world of contracts, invoices, and subtle threats. By evening, my kitchen table was covered in paperwork. I laid out the invitations, the RSVP cards, the stacks of unpaid bills. Next to them, I placed my notebook, each page filled with notes and times and names. I looked at the chaos and wondered how any of it had to do with family. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, staring out at the dusk settling over the neighborhood. Down the block, I could see the Smiths setting up a barbecue in their backyard, their grandchildren laughing as they chased each other around the lawn. I felt the old ache return, the ache of wanting that kind of closeness, the kind that couldn't be bought or sold. The next morning, Harriet called. Her voice was sharper than usual, focused. "Maggie, I've got something for you. The Walkers' restaurant, Willow and Ivy, is moving a lot more money than they claim. I dug into some state records, and there are business names tied to the Walkers that don't exist outside of paperwork. Classic shell companies. And get this, some of the payments for their event catering go to addresses that are just mail drops." My breath caught. So they really are laundering money? Harriet hesitated. "It's not proof yet. But the patterns are there. Big deposits, fake companies, unexplained expenses. Enough to raise eyebrows at the IRS. I'm compiling it all for you in a report. In the meantime, keep documenting anything strange, especially at the wedding events." A chill ran through me. I hadn't thought this would go so deep, or so dark. The Walkers weren't just pushy or entitled, they were dangerous. The stakes had changed. That afternoon, Ethan stopped by unexpectedly. He didn't call first, just walked in with a brief knock. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered, his face drawn. For a moment, he seemed like the little boy I'd once known, lost and scared. But the moment passed quickly. He was all business. "Mom, what's going on with the money? Miranda's parents are furious. They say you're sabotaging the wedding." I looked at him, searching for any sign of the son I'd raised. "Ethan, have you even asked yourself why everything comes back to money with them? This isn't about love or family, it's about control." He bristled, folding his arms. "You don't understand. The Walkers have a reputation to uphold. They've done everything for us." "Have they?" I pressed. "Or have they just bought your loyalty? You think I'm sabotaging the wedding, but all I've done is refuse to go broke for a single day's celebration." His jaw tightened. "Miranda's parents are helping us build a future. You're making things harder." I took a deep breath, holding back tears. I can't give what I don't have. And I won't apologize for that. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, mother and son, both too stubborn to back down. Finally, Ethan's shoulders slumped. He glanced at the paperwork on the table, at the scattered bills and invitations. "Why do you keep all this stuff?" I met his eyes, letting him see the pain and the determination there. "Because one day, you're going to need to remember who was really there for you. Who fought for you, even when you pushed me away." He said nothing more, just turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. I sat there in the quiet, my tea gone cold, and wondered how many mothers had lived through the same heartbreak, watching their children be bought and sold by promises that had nothing to do with love. That night, I opened my laptop and started a letter to myself. Not a diary, but a record, a place to put down everything I was seeing and feeling, so I wouldn't forget. I wrote about the Walkers' demands, about Ethan's distance, about the way grief can hollow out a house. I wrote about Harriet's warnings and the fear that came with them. And I wrote about the quiet hope that still flickered, deep down, that somehow Ethan would find his way back to me. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Harriet, meeting tomorrow at noon. I have copies of the records. Be careful. Trust no one. I lay awake for a long time after that, watching the shadows shift on the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house. The same house where I'd once soothed Ethan's nightmares, now echoing with my own. But I wasn't afraid. Not really. I'd already lost so much. There was nothing left to lose except my pride, and that, at least, was mine to keep. I barely slept that night. Harriet's text replayed in my mind, her warning echoing in the darkness. Trust no one. The words sounded dramatic, but the more I thought about everything that had happened, the invoices, the threats, the Walkers' constant need for control, the more I understood her urgency. I woke up before dawn, dressed in quiet, neutral clothes, and spent the morning pacing the living room, waiting for noon. At 11:30, I drove downtown to meet Harriet at the old Java Bean Cafe. It was nearly empty, a few students tapping at laptops, an elderly couple reading the paper together, their hands intertwined. Harriet was already there, a sturdy file folder beside her cup of black coffee. She looked up as I walked in and gave a small, reassuring smile. We didn't waste time on small talk. Harriet slid the folder across the table. Everything's in there: company registrations, tax filings, bank statements. I pulled what I could from public records, but even that tells a story. The Walkers report less than half the income their restaurant brings in. The rest goes through a maze of shell companies. This catering firm, Rosebridge Events, was paid thousands for events that never happened. And their home address? Owned by a trust registered offshore. I opened the folder, hands trembling as I turned the pages. Even as a layperson, I could see the pattern: numbers that didn't add up, payments bouncing between fake companies, luxury cars, and private club memberships, all funded by money that seemed to appear out of thin air. Harriet leaned closer, lowering her voice. They're careful, but not careful enough. If you present this to the right people, it'll spark an investigation. The IRS, state revenue, even the FBI, they all take anonymous tips seriously. And it won't just be the Walkers who get caught. Anyone connected to their scheme could come under scrutiny. A cold knot of fear twisted in my stomach. Will Ethan be implicated? He doesn't know about any of this. He just wants to marry the woman he loves. Harriet shook her head. If he's not on any of the paperwork, and you haven't given them money through these shell companies, he should be safe. But you need to be careful. Don't confront the Walkers directly. Just gather everything, and if they push, you have proof to protect yourself and Ethan. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Finally, I closed the folder and slipped it into my tote bag. Thank you, Harriet. I don't know what I'd do without you. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You do what you've always done, Maggie. You'd survive. Just remember, you're not alone. We parted outside the cafe, promising to keep in touch. I drove home the long way, needing time to think, to breathe. The city shimmered in the late spring sunshine, but I felt like I was moving through a storm. The folder on the seat beside me felt impossibly heavy. When I got home, I hid the folder at the back of my closet, behind a box of old Christmas ornaments. Then I made myself a sandwich I could hardly eat, and tried to focus on anything except the fear building inside me. That evening, the phone rang again, this time, Ethan. His voice was tight, rushed. Mom, Miranda's parents want to meet. Tonight. They say it's important. Can you come to their house at 7? My first instinct was to say no, to protect myself. But then I remembered Harriet's words, gather everything, don't confront. Maybe if I kept my eyes open, I'd see more than I expected. I'll be there, I said quietly. The Walkers' home was on the edge of town, a sprawling brick colonial with manicured hedges and a long, curving driveway. Their front porch was hung with baskets of trailing petunias, white, pink, and purple. I took a deep breath, straightened my jacket, and rang the bell. Nancy Walker answered, perfectly composed as always, her blonde hair swept back, diamond studs flashing in her ears. "Margaret, welcome. Please come in." She led me to the living room, where Charles sat in an armchair, a glass of scotch in his hand. Miranda hovered nearby, tension in her posture despite her smile. Charles didn't waste time. "We're worried, Margaret. You haven't kept your promises. The vendors are waiting, and frankly, this is starting to look bad for everyone. If you can't provide your share, we need to know now." I met his eyes, refusing to look away. "I've been clear from the start about what I can contribute. I'm sorry if it's not enough for your standards, but I will not bankrupt myself for one day." Nancy jumped in, her voice silky. "We understand things are difficult for you. That's why we're willing to help. But if you want to be part of this family, we expect you to support us fully, publicly and privately." It was a threat disguised as an offer. I could feel Miranda's eyes on me, searching for weakness. I took a slow breath, remembering Harriet's advice. "I'm here for Ethan. I love my son. But I won't be pressured or intimidated. I've given what I can. The rest is out of my hands." Charles set his glass down with a sharp click. "If you change your mind, let us know. Otherwise, maybe it's better if you don't come to the wedding at all. We want this to be a happy day for Miranda." The message was clear. I stood, chin high. "Thank you for your hospitality. I'll see myself out." I walked out of their perfect house, heart pounding but spine straight. If they thought I was going to roll over, they didn't know me at all. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, folder open before me, notes scattered everywhere. I started drafting a letter, one I'd send, if I needed to the IRS and state authorities. I might not have money or power, but I had the truth. And sometimes, the truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. I woke up the morning of the rehearsal dinner with a new sense of clarity. The sleepless nights and dread had settled into something almost like resolve. No matter what happened at the Walkers' glittering celebration tonight, I would not be cowed, and I would not disappear from my own son's life. By late afternoon, the sky was bruised with clouds as I pulled into the Blue Heron Club parking lot. The building loomed ahead, white columns and glass doors gleaming even in the fading light. The parking lot was already full, cars I recognized from the fanciest neighborhoods in town, a parade of money and privilege. Inside, the reception hall glittered with chandeliers, every table covered in white linen and pale pink roses. Waitstaff moved quietly among the guests, refilling champagne glasses and passing trays of hors d'oeuvres I couldn't pronounce. The Walkers were in their element, working the room with practiced charm, introducing Ethan to business partners and judges, local politicians, and their wives. Ethan looked a little lost, his smile tight, his eyes flicking toward Miranda every few seconds as if for reassurance. I took a seat at the edge of the crowd, watching it all unfold. From my vantage point, I could see everything: the way Charles handed envelopes to certain guests, the quick, quiet conversations that seemed to end with a handshake and a nod. It looked like any other society event, but I recognized the coded language, the subtle exchanges. Harriet's words echoed in my mind: "Document everything." I pulled out my phone and snapped a few discreet photos, saving them in a folder marked Walkers, Evidence. After the salad course, Nancy made her way over to me, a glass of wine in hand. "Margaret, you look lovely this evening," she purred. "I hope you're enjoying yourself." I smiled, as graciously as I could manage. "Thank you, Nancy. Everything looks beautiful." You certainly know how to throw a party. She leaned in, lowering her voice. It's important to us that everything go perfectly. I hope you'll do your part to make sure there aren't any misunderstandings. I met her gaze, unblinking. I'll always support Ethan. But I won't let anyone bully me. I hope that's clear. Her lips tightened, but she didn't reply. Instead, she drifted back toward the center of the room, slipping easily into another conversation, her laughter floating above the clink of crystal glasses. The evening dragged on, every minute feeling like an hour. I watched as Charles signed off on bills with a flourish, as envelopes exchanged hands, as a server slipped a wad of cash into his pocket behind a velvet curtain. All the while, I took mental notes, snapped quick photos, committed faces to memory. After dinner, Miranda made a speech, all gleaming teeth and bright eyes. She thanked her parents for making her dreams come true, and for welcoming Ethan and his family into a world of endless opportunity. Her voice caught when she said, family, and for a moment, her eyes flicked toward me. But she recovered quickly, raising her glass to the Walkers and to new beginnings. Ethan took the microphone next. He looked nervous, pale under the bright lights. He stumbled through a few jokes, then turned serious. My mom raised me after my dad died. She worked 2 jobs so I could go to college. She taught me everything I know about loyalty and perseverance. No matter what happens, she's always been there for me. For a second, my eyes filled with tears. But then Miranda stepped forward, sliding her arm around his waist, her smile fixed. The crowd clapped politely, but I saw the Walkers exchange glances, their faces unreadable. After the toasts, as the guests mingled and the musicians packed up their instruments, I wandered outside for some air. Harriet's folder felt heavy in my purse, an anchor keeping me steady. The sky had cleared, a few stars poking through the clouds. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool night, letting the tension drain from my body. Suddenly, Ethan appeared beside me, hands shoved in his pockets. For a moment, he looked like my boy again, awkward, uncertain, searching for the right words. Mom, he began, I'm sorry about all of this. I never wanted you to feel like you didn't belong. Miranda's family, they have their own way of doing things. I placed my hand on his arm, squeezing gently. Ethan, you don't owe me an apology. I just want you to be happy. But you have to see that love can't be measured in dollars or diamonds. One day you'll understand. He nodded, silent. For a long moment, we stood together in the dark, just mother and son, before the spell broke and he went back inside. When I finally returned to the ballroom, the Walkers were already saying their goodbyes, their friends wishing them well, promising to see them at the wedding. I gathered my things and left quietly, the weight of the evening heavy on my shoulders but my resolve stronger than ever. Back home, I uploaded the photos I'd taken, adding them to the growing file on my laptop. I reviewed Harriet's notes, cross-checking names and dates, assembling a timeline of events and transactions. With every new piece of evidence, the story became clearer, and so did my path forward. Tomorrow was the wedding. The day the Walkers had built their whole world around. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had the truth on my side, and sometimes, that was all you needed. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and cloudless, the kind of day that seemed almost designed for photographs and memories. I woke early, nerves jangling beneath my skin, and spent a long time choosing what to wear. I settled on a simple navy dress and a string of pearls my husband had given me years ago. As I fastened them, I looked in the mirror and tried to find courage in my own reflection. The drive to the Willow and Ivy felt endless. The restaurant was decked out in white roses and gold accents, a small orchestra playing softly in the corner as guests arrived in clusters, laughing and greeting one another with the ease of old money. The Walkers swept through the crowd, shaking hands, offering air kisses, posing for photos in front of a flower wall stamped with Ethan and Miranda's initials. When I found my seat, third row, behind the Walkers' closest friends, I felt almost invisible. All around me, people whispered about the beauty of the ceremony, the expense of the flowers, the size of Miranda's diamond. I kept my head high and folded my hands in my lap, determined not to let them see me falter. As the ceremony began, Miranda appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in a gown of silk and lace. Her mother dabbed at her eyes with a linen handkerchief, while Charles looked on, pride and calculation mingling on his face. Ethan waited nervously at the altar, smoothing his tie, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. For a moment, our gazes met, and something unspoken passed between us, a plea, an apology, or maybe just longing for a simpler time. The officiant spoke of love, family, new beginnings. I listened, only half hearing the words, my mind racing ahead. In my purse was a sealed envelope, the same kind I'd once used to send Ethan's report cards to his grandparents. Inside was a copy of Harriet's report, a timeline of the Walkers' fraud, and a letter addressed to Ethan, so you know what your new family truly values. After the vows, while the photographer gathered people for group shots, I slipped the envelope into Ethan's bag with trembling hands. I wanted to warn him, to speak, but there was no time, no privacy. I hoped the truth, once in his hands, would speak for itself. The reception unfolded in a blur of clinking glasses, rich food, and endless speeches. Nancy Walker toasted her daughter, her voice trembling with practiced emotion, and praised the union of two remarkable families. Charles bragged about the Willow and Ivy's legacy of excellence, winking at the mayor as if sharing a secret. I watched everything, noting how staff delivered sealed envelopes to certain tables, how Miranda's brother disappeared into the kitchen with a heavy-looking case, how Charles whispered instructions to the maitre d'. Every detail was fuel for Harriet's report, evidence for whatever would come next. As dessert was served, a tower of macarons and gold-dusted cakes, Ethan pulled me aside. His expression was grave, his eyes troubled. "Mom, did you put something in my bag?" I nodded. "It's important. Please read it tonight. And be careful who you trust." He frowned, but didn't press further. Before he could say more, Miranda swept him back onto the dance floor, her laughter echoing above the music. The night pressed on, every hour feeling heavier, the anticipation mounting inside me like a storm. Finally, it happened. Near the end of the evening, a commotion rippled through the room. Miranda's brother emerged from the kitchen, pale and sweating, whispering frantically to Charles. One of the vendors stormed over, brandishing an invoice and demanding immediate payment in front of a table full of guests. Phones appeared, voices raised. Nancy tried to hush them, but the scene was growing, pulling in more and more witnesses. I saw Ethan at the edge of the crowd, holding the envelope I'd given him. His face was ashen as he flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. I crossed the room to stand by his side. "Is this real?" he whispered, showing me the evidence. I nodded, my voice low. "All of it. Harriet helped me find it. I didn't want to ruin your day, but I couldn't let you walk into this blind." Ethan swallowed hard, eyes darting from the papers to Miranda, to her parents, to me. They lied to everyone. The money, the restaurant, everything. "Not everything," I said softly. "You're still my son. No matter what happens." Charles saw us together and stormed over, face red, words hissing through clenched teeth. "What have you done?" he spat, grabbing at the papers in Ethan's hand. "You want to ruin your own son's future because you're jealous?" I stood my ground, meeting his rage with calm. "No, Charles. I just want my son to know the truth. And so does everyone else in this room." The commotion drew the attention of the other guests. People crowded closer, some taking photos or recording video. The music stopped, the laughter faded, and all eyes landed on the confrontation at the center of the ballroom. Ethan spoke, his voice shaking but clear. "If you want to talk about real family, Charles, start by telling the truth. About the business, the money, the lies. He turned to Miranda, who stood frozen in shock, tears streaking her perfect makeup. Did you know about this? She shook her head, silent. Charles tried to snatch the papers again, but Ethan pulled away. In that moment, I realized that the tide had turned. The Walkers' empire, built on illusion, was crumbling, right here, under the glittering lights of their perfect party. I slipped out into the night, the sound of chaos trailing behind me. For the first time in months, I felt light, almost free. The truth was out. Whatever came next, I would face it with my head held high. The morning after the wedding felt like waking from a fever dream. I made coffee out of habit, but my hands shook as I watched the cream swirl in the cup. The house was silent, sunlight streaming across the table cluttered with old photos and the remnants of last night's notes. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with messages from Ethan or frantic calls from the Walkers, but the world was strangely quiet. By mid-morning, the silence was broken by a single knock at my door. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, his wedding suit rumpled, eyes red from lack of sleep. He didn't say a word at first, just walked inside, collapsed into a kitchen chair, and dropped the envelope of evidence on the table. I stayed up all night reading this, he said finally, his voice raw. It was all true, wasn't it? Every bit? I nodded. There was nothing to soften the blow. I wish it wasn't, but yes. Harriet double-checked everything. The Walkers' money, their business, even Miranda's trust fund, it was all built on lies. He buried his face in his hands. I can't believe it. I defended them. I let them talk me into turning on you, Mom. God, I'm so stupid. I reached across the table, resting my hand on his shoulder. You're not stupid, Ethan. You wanted to believe in something. You wanted to build a future. There's nothing wrong with that. But now you know the cost. He shook his head, tears spilling down his cheeks. I kept thinking about all the times I pushed you away, let them treat you like you didn't matter. Last night, when everything blew up, people were shouting, the police were called because of that vendor, Miranda wouldn't even look at me. Her parents just kept denying everything, telling me to play along, to protect the family's reputation. He looked up, desperation etched in every line of his face. What do I do now? The wedding's ruined, everyone knows, the Walkers are going to be investigated. Miranda, she's blaming me for believing you. I think her whole family is finished, Mom. A strange sense of calm washed over me. I'd played out this scene in my mind 100 times, Ethan broken, confused, needing me. But in reality, all I felt was a quiet sadness for everything we'd lost. I can't tell you what comes next, Ethan, I said gently. But you're not alone. I'll help you through this, if you let me. That's what mothers do, even when it hurts. He nodded, his hands trembling as he wiped his face. I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're my son. I'll always love you. The rest, we'll figure it out. We sat together in silence, sunlight slowly shifting across the kitchen floor. After a while, Ethan pulled out his phone and began scrolling through messages. People are talking about the wedding all over social media. Videos, photos, gossip. There's already rumors about the Walkers' restaurant being closed for an audit. Miranda hasn't answered any of my calls. His voice dropped to a whisper. I don't even know if we're still married. I squeezed his hand, feeling the strength return to my voice. You know what's real now, Ethan. You know who you can trust. That's more important than any party, any promise, any fancy wedding. The truth always comes out in the end. He nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw something in his eyes that I'd been missing, humility, yes, but also gratitude. As the day went on, the fallout became more public. News outlets began calling, first local, then regional. The Walkers' restaurant was shuttered by noon, city officials in and out with boxes of documents. I saw video online of Nancy Walker in tears, arguing with reporters on the sidewalk. Miranda's brother had already left town, his car spotted at the airport. Ethan spent the afternoon on my porch, fielding awkward calls from friends, blocking numbers from journalists. He barely ate, barely spoke, lost in thought. In the evening, he finally broke his silence. "I want to start over, Mom. I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I don't want to lose you again." I smiled, reaching for the battered family photo album on the bookshelf. "Then let's start here. Let's remember where you came from, before all this madness." We sat together, turning pages, tracing the story of our lives from the beginning: birthdays, graduations, road trips, first jobs. Each memory was a reminder that family wasn't built in a day, or destroyed by a scandal. It was forged in the small, quiet acts of love that no amount of money could ever buy. As night fell, Ethan gathered his things to leave. He paused at the door, uncertainty still clouding his features. "Will you come to the courthouse with me tomorrow? I think I need to speak with an attorney. I have to tell the truth, whatever happens." I nodded, pride swelling in my chest. "I'll be with you, Ethan. All the way." After he left, I sat at the table, listening to the house settle around me. The phone buzzed, Harriet, checking in, her words brief but comforting: "You did the right thing. It's almost over now. Rest." And for the first time in months, I let myself believe her. By the next morning, the world felt smaller and more hostile. The local news led with the Walkers' downfall: popular restaurant closed amid allegations of fraud and money laundering, wedding scandal shocks community. My phone rang every half hour with reporters seeking comment, old friends offering condolences, and nosy neighbors fishing for gossip. I ignored them all, focusing on the only thing that mattered: my son. Ethan arrived just after breakfast, his face pale and drawn but more determined than I'd seen in years. He wore simple clothes and had trimmed his hair, as if shedding the last remnants of his former, flashy self. Together, we drove to the courthouse downtown, the same building where I'd paid traffic tickets and registered to vote, now looming with new significance. We sat in a small conference room while Ethan met with an attorney Harriet had recommended. The woman was sharp-eyed, calm, and direct. She listened carefully as Ethan explained his connection to the Walkers, his lack of knowledge about their finances, and his role in the disastrous wedding. She asked him to recount everything: every request for money, every suspicious conversation, every detail he remembered. Ethan spoke quietly but clearly, never trying to excuse himself or lay blame. I watched him as he spoke, feeling a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. He was finally taking responsibility, finally seeing the world as it really was. After an hour, the attorney nodded. "You did the right thing by coming forward. The authorities are most interested in the Walkers and their network, not innocent bystanders. The evidence you and your mother gathered will help clarify your role. I'll contact you if investigators have more questions." When we left the courthouse, Ethan let out a long breath. "It feels like I'm waking up from a nightmare, Mom. I just wish I'd listened to you sooner." I hugged him in the parking lot, not caring who saw. "You did what you had to do. Now we start again." But starting again wasn't easy. The fallout in town was relentless. People whispered in grocery store aisles, old friends avoided eye contact, and even the pastor at church offered only a thin smile before turning away. I heard rumors that the Walkers' bank accounts had been frozen, that Nancy and Charles were facing federal charges, that their house was up for sale. Miranda had disappeared entirely, her social media wiped clean, her phone disconnected. Ethan struggled in the weeks that followed. He moved back into his childhood room, living out of boxes while looking for work. The job offers he'd once counted on, thanks to the Walkers' connections, evaporated overnight. But he didn't complain. Instead, He volunteered at a local shelter, helped with repairs around the house, and spent long hours reading in the sunlit corner of the living room. One afternoon, he found me sorting through a stack of wedding invitations and old bills. "Mom, can I ask you something?" I looked up, bracing myself. "Anything. Why did you fight so hard for me, even after everything I did? Why didn't you just give up?" The question caught me off guard. I sat down beside him, searching for words that could carry the weight of years. "Because you're my son. Because love isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up, even when it hurts. When your father got sick, when you lost your way, when you let them push me out, I never stopped being your mother. I knew, deep down, that the real you was still there, waiting to come home." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he took my hand, holding it tightly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." We spent the evening on the porch, watching the sun set behind the old maple trees. Ethan told me about his dreams as a boy, how he wanted to travel, to become a chef, to build something of his own. I listened, heart full, and promised him we'd find a way to start again. Days blended into weeks. The Walkers' trial date was set, their faces splashed across every paper in the region. I received an official letter thanking me for the anonymous tip and inviting me to testify if needed. Harriet called to check in, her voice always brisk but warm. "You did the right thing, Maggie. Some people never get their second chance. Hold on to yours." Slowly, life began to knit itself back together. Ethan found a job at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, working his way up from dishwasher to prep cook. The pay wasn't much, but the work was honest, and the owner, a gruff old man named Pete, treated him like family. Each night, Ethan came home smelling of onions and herbs, exhausted but content in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. One evening, as we shared a simple meal of roast chicken and salad, Ethan looked at me with clear eyes. "I want to make things right with you, Mom. Not just with words, but with actions. I want you to be proud of me again." I smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "You never stopped being my son. That's always been enough." He grinned, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt full, not of pain or regret, but of hope. Summer drifted in on gentle breezes, and with it came a slow, stubborn healing. The scandal faded from headlines, replaced by new controversies, but the shadow of the Walkers' downfall lingered. People still stared in the grocery store, some with sympathy, some with suspicion, but most had already moved on. In this small town, even the biggest storms eventually blew out to sea. Ethan worked long shifts at the cafe, sometimes coming home past midnight, smelling of garlic and coffee, hands nicked from hours at the cutting board. He never complained, and when I asked about his day, he'd smile and say, "Busy, but good." Pete, the owner, took a liking to him, teaching him old family recipes and sharing stories about his own rough start years ago. I went back to my routine, gardening, volunteering at the library, running errands. Yet everything felt different, as if the air in our house had changed. There was an ease now, a sense of honesty that had been missing for so long. Sometimes I'd find Ethan sitting on the porch, lost in thought, and we'd talk, about everything and nothing, about forgiveness and regret, about dreams that still waited for us on the horizon. One Sunday afternoon, as we sat shelling peas at the kitchen table, Ethan spoke quietly. "I've been thinking. I know we lost so much with all that happened. But I don't want our story to end there. I want to make a new memory. Just us." He paused, glancing at me, as if afraid I'd say no. Would you walk with me through the farmer's market next week? I'd like to cook you dinner. Something simple, something just for us." I smiled, my heart full. I'd love nothing more. That Saturday, we wandered the crowded market together, filling our basket with fresh corn, tomatoes, and a small bundle of sunflowers. We ran into neighbors and old friends, and though the first greetings were awkward, most people offered a nod or a smile. Some even stopped to chat, Mrs. Lewis from church, Mr. Crenshaw from down the block. Slowly, gently, the world was letting us back in. At home, Ethan cooked, roasting the corn, slicing ripe tomatoes for a salad, seasoning chicken with rosemary from my garden. We ate at the old kitchen table, sunlight pouring in, laughter echoing through the house. For dessert, he'd baked a peach cobbler, his first attempt. The crust was a little too thick, the peaches a bit tart, but it tasted better than anything money could buy. After dinner, we sat together in the backyard, fireflies blinking in the tall grass. Ethan reached over, taking my hand. "I'm sorry for everything I put you through, Mom. For letting them turn me against you. For almost losing you." I squeezed his hand, tears stinging my eyes. "We found our way back, Ethan. That's what matters. You're not the same boy who left, and I'm not the same mother who waited. We're stronger now." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I want to do something for you, something real. No big party, no fancy dresses. Just a blessing. A chance to say thank you. Would you let me?" I hesitated, the memories of the ruined wedding still raw, but his sincerity broke through. "Of course I will. I'd be honored." Word spread quickly, as it does in small towns. A week later, friends and neighbors gathered in our backyard, bringing casseroles and bouquets, folding chairs and stories. Pete closed the cafe early to join us, and Harriet even drove in from the next county. There were no cameras, no speeches, just simple prayers and honest words. Ethan stood up, hands shaking, and looked at me in front of everyone. "I once thought love was something you had to buy. I was wrong. My mother taught me that love means standing by someone, even when they disappoint you. She fought for me when no one else would. I hope one day I can be as strong as she is." There were tears and laughter, applause and hugs. For the first time in a long time, I felt not just seen, but cherished. As the sun set and fireflies danced around us, Harriet squeezed my arm. "You did good, Maggie. Real good. Not many people would have had the courage to do what you did." I smiled, looking around at the faces gathered in our small yard. "I just did what a mother does. I loved him enough to tell the truth, even when it hurt." Ethan sat beside me, arm around my shoulders, both of us content. Our family had been battered, our reputation nearly broken, but in the end, what mattered most remained. Sometimes, the best stories aren't the ones that make the news. They're the ones that bring you back home. The summer faded to gold and rust, and the wounds of the past month softened at the edges. The nights grew cooler, the garden's bounty waned, but in our home, a quiet peace finally took hold. There were days when old ghosts would whisper, shame, regret, what ifs, but mostly, our lives moved forward, not backward. Ethan's work at the cafe flourished. Pete promoted him to lead cook, handing him keys to the place and introducing him as the best thing that's happened to this kitchen in years. Ethan smiled more, laughed more, and when he came home, he brought stories instead of worries. I watched him with pride, seeing the man he'd become, the kind of man I'd always hoped for him, not because of money or connections, but because he'd found his own way back to honesty. The backyard blessing lived on in the stories people told. Neighbors stopped by with jars of jam and pie, and I was invited to garden clubs and book circles again. The town's eyes softened, the whispers faded. Even the pastor, who once turned away, offered us a warm handshake at church, saying, "Sometimes the greatest redemption comes after the biggest storm." Ethan started saving for culinary school, budgeting every dollar, refusing any shortcuts or handouts. We made plans together, dreaming of a trip to the coast or a dinner at some famous little spot he read about in an old cookbook. For the first time since the wedding disaster, the future felt like ours to shape. One evening in late September, as leaves tumbled from the maples, Ethan came home with a bundle of daisies for me. He set them in a glass on the table and sat down, looking both nervous and excited. "I got accepted," he said, breathless. "Culinary school in the city. I start in January. They offered me a partial scholarship. Pete even wrote a letter of recommendation. Mom, this is real." I threw my arms around him, laughing and crying all at once. "You did it, Ethan. You really did it." He pulled back, his eyes shining. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Not just for what you did to save me from the walkers, but for never letting me give up on myself. I want you to come with me to orientation. I want you there every step of the way." In that moment, every pain, every sacrifice, every sleepless night felt worthwhile. We spent the fall getting ready, gathering supplies, organizing finances, filling out forms. Harriet dropped by with cookies and hugs, promising to visit us in the city. Pete gave Ethan his old chef's knife, wrapped in a tea towel, and said, "Every scar on this blade has a story. Now it's your turn to add a few." On Ethan's last night at home, we cooked dinner together, roast chicken, potatoes, and apple pie. Afterward, we sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on and off, talking about everything and nothing. He fell asleep on the couch, a stack of cookbooks at his feet, while I watched him and whispered a prayer of thanks. The next morning, we packed up the car with boxes and books, hugged our neighbors goodbye, and drove toward the city with the windows down, letting the wind carry away what was left of the past. At orientation, Ethan was the first to introduce himself, confident and steady. I sat in the back, smiling, remembering the boy who once thought love had a price tag. Now, I saw only a man who'd learned that love meant standing up, telling the truth, and coming home, no matter how hard the road. That night, before I headed back home, we stood outside the little apartment he'd rented. Ethan hugged me tight, longer than he had in years. "Promise you'll visit," he said. "Promise you'll let me cook for you every time." "I promise," I whispered, holding on a moment longer. Driving away, the city lights faded behind me, and I felt only gratitude, no bitterness, no regret, just the soft, fierce love that survived everything. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to our story. If you've ever felt abandoned or betrayed, if you've lost your way or found your family in the ruins, know this: the truest love is the kind that forgives, that rebuilds, that says, "Come home. You still belong." If our story touched you, please like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and hope. Tell us in the comments, what would you do for someone you love? Have you ever had to fight for family when it felt like all was lost? Your words could be the light that helps someone else find their way. Because sometimes, all it takes to change everything is the courage to love, no matter what.